I started an affair because I was lonely but got caught in the worst way possible by my husband.
My husband caught me with a fare. He was next to us at the red light. Karma got me, I guess. I experienced the literal meaning of karma slaps hard and not in a good way. I'm broke, I've ruined my marriage, and I got caught in the absolute worst way. Some backstory so you understand. My name is Alicia, and I am a 35-year-old woman. I'm married to Dave, a 36-year-old man. We live in the United States and have been married for about 6 years. Dave and I met in college, and it felt like destiny brought us together. He was charming, with a smile that could light up a room, and I was totally smitten. We hit it off right away, spending all our time together, laughing, studying, and just enjoying each other's company. After we graduated, we moved to the city and started building our lives. But somewhere along the way, things started to change. Life got real, you know? We got caught up in work, bills, and all the other stuff that comes with being adults. Before we knew it, we were drifting apart without even realizing it. I started feeling lonely and lost, craving something more. And then I met this guy who made me feel alive again, even if it was just for a moment. Looking back, I know it was a mistake. But in that moment, it felt like the only way to break free from the emptiness I was feeling. I worked at a boutique, and it was an absolute blast. Sure, I didn't rake in as much dough as Dave, but it gave me some extra cash to treat myself. Plus, being surrounded by trendy clothes and friendly coworkers made every day feel like a party. Meanwhile, Dave was always swamped with work. As a big shot at his company, he made the big bucks but barely had time to breathe. He was constantly dashing from one meeting to another, trying to keep up with his job. I respected his hustle, but it meant we didn't get to hang out as much as I'd like. Dave made a lot of money, almost 10 times what I made, and so he took care of most of the bills. He handled the rent, utilities, and all that grown-up stuff. My job left me with a bit more spending money for treats like new shoes or a girls' night out. Dave gave me money, of course, but I didn't want to stay at home and be bored all day, so I picked up my job. I always wished Dave could kick back more often, but I knew his job was important. And when we did get a chance to chill together, whether it was a cozy night in or a spontaneous date night, it reminded me that love beats dollars any day well until I met Richard. While working at the boutique, I met Richard on his first day as a new guy on the team. Right off the bat, he brought this vibe that just drew people in. Richard had this way about him, friendly, upbeat, and always with a smile plastered on his face. What really made Richard stand out was his fashion sense. He just knew what looked good on people. Whether it was finding the perfect pair of jeans or a killer dress, he had this knack for picking out stuff that made everyone look and feel awesome. It was like he had this magic touch when it came to clothes. Pretty soon, word got out about Richard, and customers started flocking to the boutique. They couldn't get enough of his style tips and friendly demeanor. It was like he was the main attraction, pulling in crowds left and right. Seeing him work his magic, I couldn't help but be impressed by his talent and how effortlessly he connected with people. As days passed, I noticed Richard paying more attention to me. He'd bring me coffee, take a moment to chat, and really listen when I talked. It was nice, having someone show genuine interest in me. What really caught my attention was how Richard started complimenting my clothes. Coming from him, it meant a lot. He had this keen eye for fashion, so if he said I looked good, I knew I was rocking it. It made me feel confident and appreciated, especially in a place where style was everything. I couldn't deny that I enjoyed the attention from Richard. Sure, I was married, but it felt good to have someone notice me, to make me feel special. And Richard was just so friendly and easy to talk to. It was hard not to be drawn to him. Of course, not everyone in the boutique was thrilled about our growing closeness. I could feel the envy from the other sales associates and even some of the customers. But I tried not to let it bother me. I knew where my heart belonged, even if Richard's attention was a tempting distraction. As Richard's attention continued, I found myself enjoying it more and more. Despite being married, I couldn't deny the thrill of someone noticing me, making me feel special in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. I convinced myself that there was nothing wrong with enjoying the attention. After all, it was just harmless flirting, right? I reassured myself that Richard knew I was married, so there was no way he would cross any lines. I told myself that I was overthinking it, that Richard just wanted to be friends and nothing more. And deep down, I wanted to believe it. As Richard and I grew closer, We exchanged personal numbers and started talking outside of work. It felt exciting, having someone to share my thoughts and feelings with outside of the office. But at the same time, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind, warning me to tread carefully. Of course, you already know how it goes. I ignored the voice. As Richard and I continued talking, our conversations started to cross boundaries. We'd flirt shamelessly, yet somehow managed to play it off as innocent banter. It was thrilling and dangerous all at once. What made it even more enticing was discovering how much we had in common. We shared similar interests, laughed at the same jokes, and found ourselves drawn to each other in ways I hadn't anticipated. Then, one day, Richard suggested we hang out at his place to watch a movie. Without hesitation, I agreed. His apartment was modest compared to the spacious house Dave and I owned, but I didn't mind. I didn't want to risk inviting Richard over to our place with its security cameras and nosy neighbors. Our neighborhood may have been quiet, but I knew gossip traveled fast. We settled in with a bowl of popcorn, and I found myself enjoying the simple pleasure of watching a movie with Richard. I couldn't remember the last time I had done this with Dave. Richard and I laughed, we cried, and we shared our thoughts on the film with an openness that felt liberating. But as the night went on, things started to feel different. Our jokes got a little flirtier, our touches lingered a bit longer, and I couldn't ignore the chemistry between us. It was exciting, it was scary, and I should have stopped, but I didn't. I knew I should have put a stop to it, but I couldn't resist the pull. Richard and I crossed a line, we had sex, and I cheated on Dave. He was away, as usual, closing some big deal, and I didn't rush home in the morning. The guilt weighed heavy on me, but I found myself blaming Dave. If he had been around more, maybe I wouldn't have strayed. It was a mess of emotions for me, guilt, regret, and anger all tangled up together. I knew what I did was wrong, but part of me couldn't help but feel justified. Dave was always buried in work, and he left me feeling lonely and neglected. In my mind, I convinced myself that I deserved some happiness, even if it came at the expense of my marriage. But deep down, I knew there was no excuse for what I did. I betrayed Dave's trust, and that was something I couldn't take back. As the reality of my actions sank in, I couldn't help but wonder how I had let things spiral out of control. If only I had been stronger, if only I had resisted the temptation, maybe things wouldn't have ended up like this. But it was too late for regrets now. The damage was done, and I had to live with the consequences of my actions. There was no way I could bring myself to tell Dave that I had cheated on him. He'd drop me like a hot potato if he found out. I had to keep it hidden, no matter what. I made up my mind that I wouldn't continue my fling with Richard, but I also couldn't bear the thought of Dave leaving me. Despite our distance and his constant work commitments, I still loved him. He was the same guy I fell head over heels for back in college, driven, ambitious, and with a heart of gold. Richard could see the guilt written all over my face, and he tried to reassure me that I hadn't done anything wrong. Deep down, I knew he was lying, but his smooth talk and charm made it hard to resist. I knew I was being played, but Richard had a way of making me believe anything he said. If he told me the sky was green, I'd probably believe him. He was just that convincing. I got ready and headed home, trying to clear my head. Richard's words kept replaying in my mind. He said it wasn't my fault, and I wanted to believe him so badly. Dave still wasn't back, but I expected that. He said he'd be home the next day. I called in sick to work and decided to spend the day sleeping, hoping it would help me shake off the guilt and confusion. To avoid Richard's tempting presence, I thought about quitting my job. I mulled it over for hours, even after waking up from my nap. But something kept nagging at me. Quitting felt like giving up. I told myself that I would go to work the next few days and hope things wouldn't be too awkward. If they were awkward, I would quit, but if they weren't, I'd continue. I honestly thought it would be awkward, but Richard kept pouring on the charm, bringing me coffee, helping with sales, and showering me with compliments. It made me feel weak, like I was failing all over again. At that moment, I made a choice. I decided to go for what I wanted with Richard, no matter what. I convinced myself that I could keep it all hidden from Dave. He would never even meet Richard, and Dave was talking about working less, so he'd be around more. By that time, once Dave was available more, I would drop Richard and work on my marriage with him. I thought I could have the best of both worlds. But looking back, I see how wrong I was. I was playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before I got burned. And that's how my secret affair with Richard carried on. We'd wait until the end of our shifts, then sneak off to his place. I even ditched driving to work, leaving my car at home so Richard and I could ride together. It was thrilling, and I couldn't get enough of it. I still loved Dave, I really did. But Richard's attention was like a drug addictive and irresistible. It made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in ages, and I savored every moment of it. Dave was still as busy as ever, hardly ever home. But I didn't mind anymore, not when I had Richard to keep me company. I stopped caring whether Dave was around or not. As long as Richard was there, I was content. Deep down, I knew Richard didn't love me either. I knew it was only a matter of time before he got bored and moved on. But I pushed those thoughts aside, choosing to deal with them when the time came. Because I was happy to bask in the attention and affection Richard showered on me. Funny enough, I knew Richard had a girlfriend too, but they didn't live together. I had seen her pictures and their text messages on his phone. But I couldn't bring myself to complain or confront him about it because, well, I was married. Dave loved me deeply, and I felt guilty for betraying him. But I was too caught up in the excitement of being with Richard to care that what I was doing was wrong. It was selfish, I know, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. At one point, I got really paranoid. I started thinking if I was sneaking around behind Dave's back, maybe he was too. I checked his phone over and over, searching for any signs of cheating. I even went as far as installing a keylogger on his phone. But there was nothing there. Dave wasn't cheating on me. He was just working his butt off. And it was really paying off. Dave was bringing in serious cash. We were living in this massive 7-bedroom house with all the bells and whistles, a home theater, a man cave, even a swimming pool. We had a fleet of cars, all thanks to Dave's hard work. We also had a maid and a gardener who came by every few days, but they didn't live with us. That was my decision. It wasn't because I looked down on them or anything like that. In fact, I came from a really humble background. At one point, Dave even had to cover my college fees, believe it or not. I just preferred to keep things private and personal. We hadn't started a family yet, but that was a conscious decision we made together. We both agreed to wait a few more years, maybe until I was around 38 or 39. Dave wanted to be a hands-on dad, but he knew he was too busy with work right now to give that kind of attention to our kids. So we decided to hold off until he could settle into a more relaxed role and be there for them. At one point, Dave almost caught me red-handed. See, I had this habit of crashing at Richard's place when Dave was away. Why spend the night alone when I could hang out with Richard? That was our mindset. So it became kind of routine for me to stay over at his place, especially if I had the next day off work. One day after work, Richard and I headed to his house as usual. But a few hours later, I got a call from Dave saying he was back home and asking where I was. I was genuinely caught off guard because he hadn't mentioned anything about coming home early. He said it was a spur-of-the-moment decision and that he missed me. I had to bolt home, and let me tell you, public transport was not on my side, especially since I'd stopped using our cars. When I finally got home, I had to come up with some excuse. I told Dave I had gone out for a bit because I was bored at home, and surprisingly, he bought it. He even seemed sympathetic, which just made me feel even more guilty. After that close call, Dave started asking questions. He wondered why I stopped using the cars to go to work. I made up some story about wanting to feel like a regular person and not wanting my coworkers, who actually needed the job, to think I was trying to show off. It was a lame excuse, but Dave seemed to buy it. My blood turned to ice and I was frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. Richard must have noticed my sudden silence and followed my gaze to the Tesla. The look on my face must have given it all away because he frowned in concern. Finally, the light changed to green, and Dave started to drive away. But before he could leave, he continued recording and turned to Richard, asking, "Do you know she's married?" It was clear he was struggling to contain his anger. After questioning Richard, he drove off, leaving me to face the consequences alone. Richard glanced at me, clearly taken aback by the sudden turn of events. I could see the gears turning in his head as he processed what had just happened. He knew I was fucked. No, Richard could sense that going to his place was out of the question after what had just happened. He offered to drop me off at home, but I knew that wasn't a good idea. Dave could be unpredictable when he was angry, and I needed to give him some space to cool down before I could even attempt to talk things out with him. So I asked Richard to take me to my sister's. She lived close by and was great with advice, being a therapist and all. Richard agreed and left me at her doorstep before driving off. I tried calling Dave, but he didn't pick up. I could practically feel his anger through the phone. At my sister's, I spilled everything: the affair, the guilt, the loneliness. She couldn't wrap her head around why I'd cheat on someone as perfect as Dave. He was, in her eyes, the ultimate catch-good-looking, successful, and kind-hearted. But I felt distant from him, lost in our marriage as he buried himself in work. Richard's attention was a temporary escape from the emptiness at home. My sister said I should have talked to Dave instead of cheating. I sarcastically brushed off her suggestion, pointing out that it was too late for that and that Dave had just caught me kissing another guy at a red light. I spent a few hours at my sister's, cooling off and trying to gather my thoughts. She whipped up some food, and her comforting presence helped ease my nerves. She even offered to come back home with me if I was too scared. But I reassured her that Dave, despite his anger, would never resort to violence. That just wasn't his style. After some time, I still couldn't reach Dave on the phone, but I decided to take a chance and head back home. As I approached the house, I noticed my belongings strewn across the porch. Dave had wasted no time in tossing them out. I knocked on the door, hoping to reason with him, but Dave was resolute. He claimed he had helped me gather my things and was kicking me out of the house. I pleaded with him, begging for a chance to talk things through and apologizing profusely. But Dave wouldn't budge. He insisted on me leaving, but at least he hadn't thrown my stuff out onto the street. Dave explained that he didn't want my belongings to be stolen, considering they were expensive. It was clear he was hurt and angry, and there was no convincing him otherwise. Dave's words hit me like a punch to the gut. No matter what excuses or explanations I tried to throw at him, he wouldn't listen. I pleaded with him, telling him that the affair was just a result of my loneliness, that it meant nothing serious. I promised I was planning to end things with Richard, but Dave saw right through my words. He was fed up with my excuses, calling them bullshit, and stormed back into the house, leaving me standing there, shattered and alone. His harsh words cut deep, accusing me of distancing myself from him for a reason he now understood all too well. Dave declared that we were definitely heading for divorce, and there was no chance of salvaging our marriage. I desperately suggested couples counseling with my sister, but he only laughed, dismissing the idea as futile. It was clear that he had made up his mind, and there was nothing I could say or do to change it. With a heavy heart, I gathered my belongings and called for an Uber. Dave's parting words stung even more as he informed me that he had withdrawn his share of the money from our joint account. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but deep down I knew I couldn't argue with him. The truth was, Dave was the main breadwinner, earning nearly 10 times more than I did. He had always been financially savvy, diligently saving his earnings, while I, on the other hand, tended to spend frivolously on things I enjoyed. I had grown accustomed to Dave taking care of our finances, never bothering to save much myself. Now that I was faced with the consequences of my carelessness, I couldn't help but regret my past decisions. With nowhere else to turn, I considered my options. My parents lived in another state, and I couldn't burden them with my troubles. That left me with only two choices: my sister or Richard. Both seemed like precarious options, each with its own set of complications and uncertainties. But in that moment of desperation, I had no other choice but to reach out to them for help. On one hand, my sister had this constant need to fix everything, and it grated on my nerves. She just couldn't get that some things were beyond fixing, that some wounds were too deep. And then on the other hand, there was Richard, the guy who got me into this mess. If I wanted any shot at fixing things with Dave, I couldn't be anywhere near Richard. But with no money for a hotel and nowhere else to go, I reluctantly decided to give Richard a shot. Staying with my sister was risky. Her husband and kids might not be too happy about me crashing at their place out of the blue. So, swallowing my pride, I called Richard. But before I could even explain, he shut me down, saying he wasn't interested in us anymore. He'd decided to work things out with his girlfriend, leaving me stranded with nowhere to go. He even hung up before I could curse him out, the bastard. I was truly alone in this mess. It was beyond frustrating. Richard had left me high and dry in a mess he played a part in creating. With nowhere else to turn, I realized my only options were crashing at my sister's or facing the grim reality of a homeless shelter. And there was no way I was going down that road. Summoning what was left of my pride, I called my sister and poured out everything. To my surprise, she was more than willing to lend a helping hand. An Uber took me away to her place, where she greeted me with open arms. She rustled up some food once again and offered me a place to crash for the night. I was immensely relieved and grateful for her kindness. I had half expected her to turn me away. I dozed off for a bit, hoping to escape the mess for a moment. But when I woke up, my sister showed me this video Dave had sent her. It hit me like a ton of bricks. There was Richard, leaning in for a kiss in the car. And then afterwards, Dave's voice could be heard asking Richard if he knew I was married. It was pretty damn obvious what Dave was trying to show. I was floored. My sister explained that Dave had reached out to her, saying he wanted out of the marriage and wasn't interested in fixing things, despite her efforts to talk some sense into him and suggest counseling. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, my sister offered to hook me up with a lawyer she knew. But she warned me not to get my hopes up. The chances of getting anything from Dave were slim to none. I felt completely screwed, to be honest. I've made up my mind to wait for the lawyer's advice, though I'm not getting my hopes up too high. Dave's got solid video proof of me cheating, and that puts him in a pretty strong position. On top of that, the house is in his name, and there's even a prenup in place. Dave's always been the one bringing in the big bucks, and he's always been careful to protect his assets, hence the prenup. So realistically, the chances of me walking away with anything from this marriage are slim to none. But hey, I'll take whatever I can get. It's better than nothing. I guess karma really came back to bite me in the worst way possible. They weren't kidding when they said karma is a bitch. It sure slapped me hard. What hurts the most is that Richard, the jerk who helped me create this mess, won't face any consequences. It's all on me. But I refuse to let him off the hook that easily. I'll dig around, maybe find out who his girlfriend is, and make sure she knows the truth. I've got evidence on my phone that Richard's been cheating on her, and I won't hesitate to send it her way. I'm not going down alone in this mess. Either way, let this be a lesson. Cheating never pays off. It's just not worth it. Need advice quickly. I got myself in a big mess. BC, I dated his friend, now he wants to divorce. I am in a very big mess because of my stupidity and desire for something new. I didn't know that he would find out about my abomination. He would actually want to end our union. I love him, and I actually don't see myself marrying another man. But him. What I did is ungodly and disgusting, but why would the consequences or karma deal with only me? Why am I the only one suffering while I was not alone in this whole thing? I know I am the one who is married, and I should have respected the vows that I had made in front of the Lord and our guests, especially our families. It was so evil of me to go against my vows and commit adultery while I am married. But it doesn't change the fact that I was not the only one performing the sinister. I dated his friend, so if he was to cut ties with me, he should also cut ties with his friends. But life is never fair on women's rights. All the guys' friendships have codes, right? I think they call it a bro code, a code whereby you vow not to either date or get into an intimate relationship with your friend's partner or sibling. The guy that I had cheated with had broken the code, but nothing was happening to him, while I was suffering the consequences of the actions that we had made. I really need help on this one. I am somehow confused, but I also want to fix my marriage with my husband. So my husband, Tony, male 35, and I, female 33, met at a mutual friend's wedding. Well, more like at my cousin's wedding. He was a friend of my cousin's husband. We were sitting at the same table. He was and still is a very handsome, clean, and sophisticated gentleman. I remember on the day we met, I had worn a very long dress, so it somehow tripped me and I almost fell. Imagine falling in front of all the people that were in that hall. It would have been such a bummer and embarrassing. So Tony luckily caught me beforehand since I was trying to stand when I tripped, and he was sitting next to me. His touch gave me goosebumps that I didn't even know I had. Not to mention his soft hands. It felt so right when they touched me. Even his gentle gesture was something else. What I felt for Tony was what I can call love at first sight. He didn't try much or said many words, but his gentleness and handsomeness drew me to him. During that day, we were talking and laughing. It was really nice to be with him. He was in good company. He made me forget about anything else. It felt like nothing was existing except for him and I. I even forgot that we were at my cousin's wedding. I had found a friend and also a lover there. I thought I had found the one my soul needed. He was my answered prayers, his gentleness, a big dreamer and a successful man who still had goals to be more successful than he was. I love a man who knows what they want and makes every means to get it. Mind you, at that time I had a plan of starting my own internet cafe and coffee shop, and with Tony's knowledge and skills in IT, I knew I had gained resources to help me start a successful internet cafe. It seemed like it was a blessing in disguise, you know. It felt like with Tony by my side, I would have everything figured out, and it would be successful with his intelligence on board. Since then, we became friends. He taught me a lot about IT that I didn't know. Well, I wanted to start an internet cafe because we didn't have one in Sicily, only in big cities, which was far from where I was staying. So I wanted to help my community get easy access on the internet without even having to go to the big city for it. I made it specifically for students so that they can have easy access to the internet and be able to find school projects information in it without having to waste more money to get to the big city to get it. Tony helped me start the internet cafe, which was very sweet and generous of him. I was glad for the service that he had delivered. He started being a computer tutor. Each and every minute that I would spend with him was always priceless. I still melted in his touch and his voice. It had that kind of thing that makes you feel like you have been given some voodoo, or he uses voodoo to make my heart palpitate. Months later, Tony declared his love for me. Well, I had already felt something for him, and I was falling pretty hard for him, but I couldn't tell him. I was protecting my heart from being rejected and my ego and pride. He told me how much he enjoys spending time with me and thanked the opportunity that I had given of trusting him with my community children and students. Well, Tony was not from Sicily. He had first come for the wedding, which was the first day that we had first met. So Tony and I dated for 2 years. We were still in the phase of knowing each other very well before we tied the knot. It was the best option, and it gave us time to learn more about each other. I was happy with the fact that Tony was not rushing to any marriage. Yes, we were committed to each other. About 1.5 years later, he popped the biggest question. My love for him kept escalating. I don't know if I was getting obsessed with Tony, but I couldn't live without him. Even if he was not around or we were not talking either on the call or text, I would feel like he was up to no good. You know when you try to contact your partner and his phone keeps either putting you on hold or gets to voicemail at the same time? I was somehow insecure and I didn't want any woman to even see my Tony's side. He was mine and mine alone. Well, Tony was residing in Agrigento in the southern coast of Sicily, while my home was in Piazza Armerina, which was about 1 hour and some minutes drive apart. So he would go home for like a week, then come to see me whenever he was free, or I would go to his city when I was not busy. Our love was like a flower. It kept blossoming every minute that we would spend with each other or when we were communicating. Months later, well, we had gotten 2 years of dating, so we got married on the day of our dating anniversary. You know, it's really nice and fulfilling having to spend the rest of your life with your favorite person who is also your partner. We got to share all our flaws, our dreams, our future, and plans. After getting married, we moved to Cefalù, where we wanted to start our own family. We were living the dream, and I couldn't be much happier. I mean, why wouldn't you be happy when you have been given a chance to spend the rest of your life with someone who you fell in love with on the first day that you saw him? I fell in love with Tony the day we had first met. Deep down, I knew that he was my soulmate and my caregiver. He didn't have to try hard to make me happy and feel complete. He knew how to make me feel better during my dull days. He always knew how to put a smile on my face. But you know, when I was to be asked why I cheated or dated his friend, I don't know how I would answer that question because I have no response for it. Anyway, time passed. Tony started getting too busy to spend time with me. Yes, the intimate moments were still fine, but I needed his attention and I wanted to spend more time with him. I mean, we had stayed far away from each other for almost 2 years when we were still dating. Ever since we got married, we had spent a couple of times together. We would go out, eat out, or go to play games. My relationship or my marriage with Tony was somehow great because we would always allow ourselves to be young again. playing games, going out on ice cream dates, attending exhibitions together. We were stress-free and carefree. It was like we were in our very own dimension, living with our rules. So one sunny Saturday, Tony had left the house to buy meat. He had asked me to prepare something since his friends were coming over to celebrate his other friend's arrival in Italy. I have heard that he was residing in Los Angeles, LA, but now he had relocated to this side. So I prepared everything, and Tony's other friends started coming with their partners. Of course, everyone was having a good time up until the man of the day arrived. You know when someone says, "I feel like I am looking at Jesus himself"? Well, that was what I felt. His body structure, cleanly trimmed mustache, his sexy hazel blue eyes. I was taken aback by the guy. He was really handsome. You know, the kind of handsome Leonardo DiCaprio. That was how he looked. His eyes looked naughty though, and I love being naughty. The guy was not at my wedding with Tony. I had heard that he was working since he was a doctor. The guy was introduced as Bradley, male, 33. His appearance was charming and mind-blowing. You know when you see someone for the first time and automatically feel attracted to them. That was how I felt with Bradley. I was not attracted to him because of his handsomeness only, but I would sometimes imagine myself being intimate with him. I imagined myself and him riding and grinding each other. My imaginations went wild to a point that I would see him exploring my whole body, his pinkish, sexy lips kissing every fiber of my body. I know it was wrong of me to drool and think like that for my husband's friend, but I couldn't help it. I mean, the guy was everything and more. I just wanted or craved for only one night with him, then it would have been enough for me. I am a witch and a loose cannon, I know, but how was I supposed to stop my mind and desire to think about the poor guy? Mind you, that time he was going to be staying with us for some time up until he gets his own place to stay. So imagine the torture and pressure that I would be feeling. I know it's sinister to have these kinds of thoughts for your husband's friend, but I couldn't help it. Only one night with him was going to solve everything. As much as I love my handsome, smart husband, Bradley was the type of guy that you can only have a crush on and date because he was too extreme. His handsomeness, the way he was speaking, would make any woman drop their panties for him. 1 week later, we were still staying with Bradley. Well, most of the time I was with him in the house. He is a very cool guy, carefree, talkative, and funny. He easily adjusted to the new environment and it was going well for him. I had seen him doing workouts a few times in the morning. His abs were something else. I felt like I would touch them. I had so many dirty thoughts for the poor guy, and I really wanted to stop thinking like that with my husband's friend. During that week, I remembered that I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for both me and him. He came in wearing only a very tight vest and jogging shorts. He just stayed with me in the kitchen, keeping me company. Only if he knew that his company was a destruction to me. He started asking me about my relationship or my marriage with Tony, wanting to know how it was. I told him what he needed to hear and found it enough to share. I couldn't tell him everything about my marriage. Yes, he was my husband's friend, but I couldn't tell him everything that is going on between Tony and I. Mind you, that time, Ton and I had been arguing a lot lately about him being always absent even when his friend is around. That led to a very heated and biggest argument. My husband and I were slowly drifting apart. Yes, our connection and love would always be there, but we were drifting apart. I felt like he was trying to push me away because even when he is under stress and pressure, he no longer confides in me as his wife. I would sometimes wonder who he confides to if he was shutting me out the way he was doing. It really hurt me having to beg every day for your partner to give you the attention that you need. The more I was spending time with Bradley, the more we got closer. I ended up confiding in him about Tony's behavior because it was really shocking to me. I didn't know who to talk to, so Bradley was the only person who was willing to listen to me vent about my marriage. I know I shouldn't have done that, but what I was supposed to do. Because I couldn't keep my sadness and heartbreaking moments inside my chest. I was going to burst, and a lot would have been destroyed. So Bradley prepared snacks for us, especially marshmallows and hot chocolate, which were my favorite when I was not feeling well or feeling down. I appreciated the time and ear that Bradley had led me and made me vent in him. I needed to offload, my chest was too heavy. As I was crying like that, Bradley hugged me and promised me that he would speak to Tony. Since Tony had been so distant, especially after the argument that we had, he started going to work early in the morning and came back late at night. Bradley's hug was actually what I needed. You know, the kind of hug that is warm and welcoming, the one that makes you feel like everything is going to be okay. So as we were still hugging, I found myself kissing him. We kissed, and things got out of hand. A kiss escalated. We ended up doing the deed in the lounge. Mind you, that time I had forgotten that Tony had recently planted CCTV cameras in the house. I had completely forgotten about that, and Bradley didn't even know about it. Since that indescribable day, Bradley and I continued seeing each other. Sometimes we would get intimate in my marital home, while some other time we would go to a nearest hotel to book for the day. We couldn't book for the night because my husband was going to be suspicious. We did our thing carefully because if Tony was to find us, we both knew that we were going to suffer the consequences, and I would be left a divorced woman. Bradley was giving it to me so sweet and gentle. He was very explosive. He knew how to explore a woman's body and make her feel foreign and end up speaking in tongues. He knew every spot to touch to make me submit to his commands. Well, he loved gentle, rough, intimate moments. I didn't even know that there was actually gentle, rough type of intimate sessions. I learned a lot from Bradley, even some new positions that someone would think are extreme, but they are very enjoyable and nice. I was not a submissive wife to my husband, but with Bradley, I was submissive without even thinking twice. My husband loved missionary intimacy, while Bradley loved exploring new positions, and I learned a lot. I mean, my own husband was a 1 or 2 rounds type of person, then he would get tired and fall asleep. Bradley, on the other hand, was a dragon. He was spitting fire when it comes to intimacy. He would make you go all night, and even wake you in the morning. He would always leave my private area burning and tired. The guy knew his thing, and up until today I complimented him. He is the best. My relationship with Bradley went on and on for like 9 months. We were still careful, but Bradley didn't want us to be private. He wanted us to be seen in public as dating people, and that was not what I had wanted. As much as I was enjoying the intimacy and everything that Bradley was offering, but I loved my husband so much. I wouldn't just leave my husband for an intimacy freak like Bradley. He is doing me good and exploring my body the way I had been desiring, but I wouldn't divorce my husband to be with him. He didn't understand that our relationship was an intimate relationship only and nothing more or less. But the poor guy had caught feelings, and that was not what we had agreed on. It was purely and strictly intimacy. Weeks later, I ended my affair with Bradley. I felt like I had destroyed my marriage and went against my wedding vows. I shouldn't have allowed temptations and desires to control me like that. I should have respected myself and my marriage with Tony. Bradley had started to catch feelings, and it was not looking good because we would sometimes argue about his obsessive behavior. I don't know why he was suddenly obsessed because we had an agreement of no strings attached, but he decided to attach strings on our thing and the whole thing got crushed. I went back to my marital home. I wished to change the location and buy a new home for Tony and myself because the house held so many memories. Even the memory of myself committing adultery for the first time was in my marital home. I felt like I had disrespected my husband in the worst way possible, and there was no way to undo what I had done. I know I had wanted or craved for Bradley for at least one night, but it shouldn't have escalated like it did. And guess what happened? I was F******. Few days later, Tony was back at home. Well, he was working at home most of the time. The guilt was eating me up like a deadly disease. I had tried to act normal around my husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something was wrong. I couldn't bear looking at him and acting like a happy wife while I knew what I had done. Tony, being as nonchalant as ever, didn't seem to notice anything amiss. The guilt and anxiety of my abomination grew with each passing day. The following week, it was a Monday afternoon. I was watering the garden when our family lawyer came to the house. I was so confused by why Hamilton, our lawyer, would come to our house. I knew that he wouldn't come if it was not important or urgent, so I started getting palpitations. My mind drifted to Tony. I had thought something had happened to him. I couldn't bear to see myself being a widow. My mind was busy taking me to places that I didn't want to see myself in. Hamilton asked to speak with me and told me that it was important. I knew that he wouldn't leave his specious and fancy office and come to my house if it wasn't important. So we went inside and he gave me an envelope. He told me that he was sent by Tony and that I should read everything properly first before signing. Another thing he told me was that I was free to fight and try to save whatever that would be lost after signing, but he didn't think fighting would be a good idea. The way he was speaking in riddles, I got conscious and ended up opening the envelope. When I opened the envelope, I couldn't believe my eyes. I felt like my heart was stepped on by an elephant and my body was hit by a truck. I was lost in words. I told Hamilton that I wouldn't let Tony divorce me without a fight, and I was not going to sign those divorce papers. I didn't know why Tony would want to divorce me. That time, the abomination that I had done didn't even cross my mind. I kept trying to sort the puzzles and asking myself, why would Tony suddenly want to divorce me? Few days later, Tony and I were in the magistrate's office with both our lawyers. I couldn't just let him take everything away from me. I was asked to state why I didn't want to sign the divorce papers. I told them that I couldn't let Tony, my husband, leave me without any explanation on why he would wake up and decide that he wanted to divorce me and take our home. And I couldn't just let him break my heart like that. When it was Tony's turn to speak or defend himself, he said the worst hurtful things to me. He called me names and told me that he was regretting ever marrying me. If he knew I was a witch that I was, he wouldn't even bother looking my way the day we met. He was furious to see that even temple veins were popping. He looked murderous, and he wasn't the Tony that I had been married to. He then dropped a huge bomb at me that I had long forgotten about. He told me that he knew about my affair with Bradley, his friend, and that I had been seen going to the hotel with Bradley when he was at work. I couldn't believe how he got the information. He told me that he had been acting like everything is normal and okay, but he knew all the dirt that I had done, so he wants nothing to do with me, and I should just go back home and continue running my internet cafe and a coffee shop. I denied every allegation that he was accusing me of. I even denied being in any relationship with Bradley. While I was still fighting, screaming and kicking, Tony gave Hamilton a USB, and there it was. All the evidence of my abomination was there. I didn't know what to say nor do. I had no way back. I didn't even know how to defend myself. It was really humiliating and embarrassing. I tried to apologize to Tony, but he wanted to hear nothing from me. I had no other choice but to obey his request. I went back home and signed the papers. My heart was shuttered. Even today, when I think of everything, my heart breaks. I miss Tony so much, and I regret everything that I have done. What should I do to get my husband back? I can't let him go like that. I need advice quickly.